Cyberpunk Edgerunners, Episode 1. In this alternative futuristic setting, our protagonist is a broke and stubborn boy named David Martinez. Here, there are chips in everyone's brains for calls, messages, and slots for any chip that can improve your skills. David steps to school after having a chat with his paramedic mother about how he needs an upgrade for his wreath in school, but wants to install a counterfeit via a black market roboticist named Ripperdoc. Upon getting to Arasaka Academy, his mates begin to mock him. He brushes this off, but his knockoff wreath ruins the school exercise. His mother is summoned as the principal complains of David destroying the school system. She apologizes profusely and drags his ass home. On their way, she falls into tears, describing the life she wants for David. Their moment is interrupted by random bandits having a shootout. Unfortunately, after the accident, paramedics abandoned them because they had no insurance. He manages to get her to a hospital, and later he goes home all bandaged up. David searches for money around the house but finds Sandavist and cyberware instead. He later asks Doc how much it's worth. He gets bullied in school and attempts to fight the scumbag. Unfortunately, he had the MMA freeware in his chip and the Strong Arms 400 modification. Bottom line, David takes quite the beating. He gets back to the hospital to see that his mother is dead. With all the debt she's left, David is more confused than ever. Katsuo, who beat him up, calls to taunt him about his mother's death. This annoys the shit out of David, and he takes the Sandavistan to Doc, asking him to implant it in him. Episode 2. Doc turns him down, screaming that it's a military-grade implant and most people don't survive implantation, much less live a long life with it. When he sees how serious David is, he implants it anyway. Immediately after this, David heads back to school and breaks Katsuo's nose. Life remains bleak until he sees Lucy on the train. They officially meet when she tries stealing his chip, and he catches her. She's left in awe and asks him how he did it. She notices the Sandavistan and offers to work with David. They bleed every Arasaka employee on the train dry of their chips, and when they get off, David's nose begins to bleed until he passes out. Lucy gets him an ambulance, but the paramedic plans to extract the Sandavistan and sell it. So Lucy pops the ambulance doors open and rolls David into traffic. Afterwards, David asks to be taken to Doc's clinic, and Lucy obeys. He has to exchange his chips for immunosuppressants, and Doc then warns him not to overdo it. David meets up with Lucy outside, and she takes him to her house, where they talk about everything over beers. Lucy then runs a simulation of the moon with him, and both of them share a beautiful moment. Unfortunately, it was all a lie. Lucy had set him up, giving him up to Maine, the original owner of the Sandavistan. Episode 3. Maine and the other cyberpunks surround David as Maine holds him upside down. He's so pissed that he considers ripping the Sandavistan from David's spine, but Louis made him promise not to kill him. After some questions, Maine discovers that Gloria was David's mother. She'd been his Sandavistan connection. He drops David to the ground after this. David then uses the opportunity to ask for a job, but Maine is skeptical, making David put on a show to prove he can use the implant. He gets a chance because of how loyal his mother was, and Maine makes Lucy implant a tracer in David so he can't run. After they all leave, David expresses his disappointment in Lucy. He gets a phone call from Arasaka Academy. Apparently, they want to give him a scholarship and even offer to strike out some of his offenses. David isn't interested, so he ends the call before the principal can finish speaking. As though on cue, Maine calls him up for a job and introduces him to Kiwi, Dorio, and Pillar. The job involves getting the navigation data from Maxim, a driver for Arasaka Corp. They use his love for death against him by making his favorite fighter die on the night of the mission. Maxim drowns his sorrows in a bar, and as he's under, David steals the car key from him so they can copy it. Unfortunately, Maxim gets called by his boss mid-mission, so David has to use the original key while Becca distracts him. Lucy helps David get the data, but Maxim doesn't stay distracted for long. Their time elapses, and an angry Maxim shoots at the car, leaving David no choice but to drive like crazy. Arasaka Corps hires Taiga Claws to chase after them, but David uses his Sandavistan to phase and phase until he gets rid of both oppositions. One of them survives and almost kills him after they arrive at the garage. David gets saved thanks to Maine. Afterwards, they celebrate their win, and Maine welcomes David to the crew. Faraday, Main's middleman, is angry about the mission not being discreet and scolds Main thoroughly. Just then, David's principal calls again, and he tells him to piss off. Episode 4. Days pass without him hearing anything, and David reaches out to Main. He's eager to stand on his own, so Main sends him on an errand to collect new arms for Pillar. He delivers them, and he gets a huge tip. Later that night, Main bullies Lucy into spending time with David. She complains about him not being bulky enough to take on new implants, and they make it a thing to run together. Meanwhile, David's training continues as Main teaches him how to shoot, how to drive, and how to steal. They go on multiple test runs, all to better equip David for the life of a cyberpunk. He gets mechanical lungs and other augmentations after bulking up. They're going to base one night, and Pillar thinks it's wise to bug a cyber psycho taking a piss. This gets his head blown off. Becca immediately attacks the psycho, and the rest of the gang backs her up. He holds his ground, but their joint effort helps them defeat him, with Main delivering the final blow. Lucy and David link up later that night. They sit on a rooftop as they discuss how far apart their worlds are. David disagrees, but all Lucy really wants is for him not to die on her. As he promises to take her to the moon, Lucy shuts him up with a kiss. Episode 5. David and Main talk about Pillar's arms, but David doesn't want them. He wants Main's instead. He agrees to give them up if he dies. Their bromance gets interrupted when Kiwi comes back with new information on Tanaka. Since David went to school with his son, they used that to link him to the famous JK, a brain dancer who custom-made revolutionary chips. They conclude that Tanaka would meet JK in private and track down Julius to a parking lot. They try to kidnap him, but he uses an EMP to disable all their gear, kidnapping David in the process. David awakes amidst dead bodies and makes a run for it, killing more officers along the way. He has no idea he's in a simulation. Lucy and Dorio locate him, but as they save him, JK sets his bulletproof drones against them. David keeps them busy and Lucy works hard to hack them. She succeeds, leaving JK no choice but to submit himself. He promises David that he'll become a cyber psycho no matter what. They use him as bait to lure out Tanaka, and upon his arrival, they jam all networks. Tanaka tries fighting back, but gets JK killed and himself knocked out, thanks to David and Main working together. The team makes a run for it after realizing that a trauma response is coming for Julius. Episode 6. Kiwi is still knee-deep in Tanaka's mind, but Main loses his on the outside. He begins to act out, punching down on Kiwi and pushing everyone away. It seems like cyberpsychosis, and Falco reaches out to David and Lucy. No matter the immunosuppressants Main takes, they don't work. Lucy then offers to dive in place of Kiwi, choosing David to be her guide. Tanaka awakes under his watch and manages to stop David from sending him back under. None of this helps Lucy, but she finds the information anyway. David is so shaken that he doesn't pass out. Tanaka, Main, and Dorio have to break in and do it themselves. Lucy almost dies in the process, but they save her just in time. The trauma response is then activated when Tanaka flatlines, as are the cops. Lucy and David escape to the parking lot, but Dorio and Main stay back to fight. David threatens to go back and help Main fight, but Lucy warns against it. He doesn't listen and goes anyway. Meanwhile, Main dips in and out of sanity, and Dorio's dying pushes him to full-on cyberpsychosis. Main causes a bloodbath the way he runs through officers, and David meets him at the makeshift altar he made for Dorio. Max Tack draws closer, but Main has long given up on life. He pushes David away, giving him his mechanical arm as promised. Episode 7. It's been years since Main's death, and David is now in charge. He and the crew take on a mission to retrieve a client's daughter from a nest of cyborgs. Kiwi short-circuits all the Borgs in one go, giving Becca and David a chance to blow their brains out. He then comes face-to-face with a big one and has to employ special techniques before getting a chance to also blow out his brains. Unfortunately, Julio, the newbie, gets killed by a stupid trap. David crosses his remains and rescues the client's daughter. Afterwards, David goes to Ripperdoc for a tune-up, seeing as he's almost all metal now. Faraday has Kiwi set up a meeting for him and David. They introduce themselves, and Faraday asks David to prove himself by doing a job for Militech, Arasaka's top competitor. This job will involve Lucy's help, but she's been taking a break since Maine died. She opens up to David when they go stargazing, telling him of how Arasaka had recruited herself and 12 other kids to train them as netrunners. Arasaka Corps had sent them into the old net to source lost knowledge after a revolutionary netrunner shattered the net. Only Lucy survives as the kids finally rebel against the corporation. Present day, and the corporation snoops too close to the old net, so Lucy takes out their netrunner. Episode 8. David infiltrates Arasaka and kills Director Evans, who is in charge of the cyberskeleton research team. Maine's arm twitches on David. He even loses time as a side effect. Later on, Arasaka Intelligence put 2 and 2 together and discovered that the fixers of Night City must be involved in the director's death. They launch a full-scale attack on them, and Faraday doesn't go scot-free. He ends up reaching out to Arasaka Intelligence, and they leave him with a deal to bring in the netrunner messing with their old net deep dive, alive or dead, offering $1 million for the former and half that for the latter. His killing a bystander messes with David's head, and Becca calls him out on it. On the other hand, Lucy confirms that Arasaka is still sending netrunners into the old net. David passes out after reminiscing about the murder for the umpteenth time and awakes at Ripper Docks. Cyberpsychosis sets in as he tries to strangle Doc for telling him to reduce his use of chrome. Lucy tries questioning him about it, but he downplays his ailment, saying he's special. She's interrupted by an alert pinpointing the location of the new netrunner, Arasaka Corps. She excuses herself without telling David her destination and gets ambushed by a familiar face. That familiar face is Kiwi. Episode 9. Faraday hooks David and his team up with a huge score, asking them to retrieve precious cargo from armored Arasaka trucks. Faraday had also hired other cyberpunks to do collateral damage, but they have no idea. He and Kiwi had discussed all about David and how Arasaka still thinks he's the best candidate to try out the cyberskeleton, despite all of Lucy's efforts to scrub his information from their servers. Becca had met David in a dire state. She'd help him activate his immunosuppressants, but begged him not to use his Sandevistan, present day, and David uses it to stop the targeted truck from falling over a cliff. They're surprised when Miltech shows up with full force to attack them and hides inside the truck, only to find the cyberskeleton while they're there. Conveniently, Kiwi reiterates all the specs and urges David to give it a try. A phone call comes from Lucy doing the same. With the threat outside, David uses his stabilizers and gives the cyberskeleton a go. Falco falls into the truck, only to warn the team of Kiwi's betrayal. Just then, David unleashes unimaginable power but risks going psycho each time. It becomes worse when Lucy finally reaches out to him and warns him of Faraday's plan. Unfortunately, she gets recaptured. After David defeats all of Miltech's tank trucks, he readies himself, Becca, and Falco to go retrieve Lucy. Episode 10. The whole incident makes both sides go after David, the Arasaka and Miltech alike, but they're not even close to defeating him because of the cyberskeleton. Kiwi tries to cut ties with Faraday, but he summons her to meet in person for her money. Unfortunately, he plans to kill her, and she can't run far enough. David is basically on the edge of psychosis, with only 2 vials of immunosuppressants left. Arasaka Intelligence has no choice but to release Atom Smasher, the second candidate for the cyberskeleton. A dying Kiwi calls Falco and hands him Faraday's location before biting the dust. They track down Faraday. He seems to be bringing Lucy to Arasaka, and in order to keep up, David uses 1 more vial, leaving him with his last. He phases into the gathering and releases Lucy first. He then shoots everyone present except Faraday, just because he wants him to die slowly. Atom Smasher shows up, and both men get into it with their Sandavistans. David uses up the last vial but gets brought back to his senses when Lucy kisses him. Unfortunately, Atom Smasher kills Becca, pushing David over the edge. He makes Falco escape with Lucy and fights Atom with all his might. Piece by piece, David gets torn apart until Atom shoots him in the head. Our boy's death was imminent, but he died knowing Lucy would fulfill her dream of seeing the moon up close.